want to give a disclaimer before I jump in. I wish I would have done this at the 8:15, which you are not. You are the 10 a.m. But this is, it can feel like a hard sermon. It was funny, like when I was preparing for this message, I was like, oh, this, I'm used to preaching heavy sermons. I don't consider this to be a heavy sermon, but it can be hard. I think what I would ask is two things. One, pray for the grace for me to deliver this message. Two, the grace for you to receive it. Because I understand as I jump into some of these conversations, you may receive this a way that I didn't intend to deliver it. And that's where I need grace, because I'm not intending for it to come across as judgmental to anyone. What I am trying to do is preach to believers in here to encourage us to take work serious. So I just want to get that up front as we dive into this, and I'm sure you'll kind of understand as we walk through this. Just ask the Holy Spirit to give you wisdom to receive today. Can we do that, church? In the 1960s, President Lyndon B. Johnson started a program. And this program, he declared a war, an unconditional war on poverty. And his aim was to help resolve poverty issues, but also get to the root of poverty issues. And out of this came programs that many of us know today, like Medicare, Medicaid, food stamps, and the Civil Rights Act. And the whole purpose of this, obviously, was to get to the root of poverty, but also create equality when it came to employment opportunities. And in fact, in the next 10 years, poverty would go down in America from 22% to 12%. So there was some success out of some of those programs. Now, the problem is that you fast forward to today, and poverty is still a huge issue in America. And I think there were some good intentions on some things, but here's what I want to remind people. You cannot legislate work ethic. And you can't legislate certain things that solve people's heart problems. Most of what we see culturally that is wrong with society has nothing to do with a new law that needs to be made. Our hearts need to be transformed. I want us to see that first and foremost. And so while we saw some great things happen through the Civil Rights Act and equal employment, I think what began to happen, the negative impact, was also that it created a society that had huge dependence upon the government. We actually had, we grew up with society with a culture that did not think that they had to work. In fact, you see this attitude today, that our attitude is, take from those who have and give it to those who don't have, even though they didn't do anything to earn it. And I think it's a dangerous precedent to set. In fact, when we see this culture, I think we have a culture that actually rewards people for not working. You don't have to work to get what you want. Just take from those who do work and give it to those who refuse to work. Now, here's where this tension begins to really grind. Is because as Christians, as followers of Christ, we see in the Bible through scriptures that we have a responsibility to the poor. We do. We see that in Scripture. We have a responsibility for the orphan, for the poor, for the widow, as the Scriptures tell us. Now, here's the difference. Many times when we read the Bible through our modern-day American lens instead of an ancient Israelite context in which it was written. Because I think what we try to compare sometimes when we talk about helping the poor, because as a church, I want you to know that in our community and beyond, there are a ton of people who expect the church that their number one role or the number one job is to give them money all the time. And while I will tell you that the church does play a role in helping those in need, it is not our job to keep people up. And we're going to talk about that. We're going to kind of, and again, receive with grace this morning, right? And so I want us to look at really the difference really quick in first century Israel versus modern day and some of the similarities and the differences. Because when we talk about poverty in first century Israel and today, there are some things that are similar, but most of it is apples to oranges. So let's think about women and children in ancient Israel. Were not valued. You were not considered, you weren't even numbered as a part of society. In fact, children were so not valued that if you had a child and you didn't like the gender of the baby or the baby had a defect, it was common practice, not just like an outlier, common practice for you to put that baby in the wild and just allow wild animals to ravage it. This was pre-Christ. And so, as a woman or a child, your only value came from the man in society. It's a very matriarch society. That's why widows is such a big deal. Have you ever just asked yourself, like, man, widows are mentioned a lot in the Bible? One, the average lifespan of a first century Jew was about 35 to 40 years old as a man. And so there was a high probability as a woman, your husband would die at some point in your marriage. That's why when you read in the New Testament, when Paul encourages widows, he says, listen, we need to have a plan to take care of the elderly widows because they're not old enough to remarry. He said, but if you're a young woman and your husband died at a young age, you need to try to get remarried. In other words, it's not the church's responsibility to keep you up just because you don't want to try to have an effort to start a family or whatever. And so you kind of see this played out in the New Testament. So that helps us understand a couple of things because you got to remember there was no middle class. You had those with and those without. The moment you became a widow, you were at the bottom of the economic and social status. Anybody ever read the book of Ruth? You see this come to life. Ruth and her mother-in-law were both widows. And what did they have to do to survive? Go into a field and live off people's scraps. People didn't see it as their responsibility to take a woman in who her husband had died. So a lot of what you see in the New Testament, this was like revolutionary to have the concept and idea to take care of women who could not take care of themselves and to also take care of children who could not take care of themselves. Revolutionary. And so we see this in first century. So this is why it was a big deal to say, hey, as believers, we have a responsibility to take care of the widows and the orphans. We tracking so far. Remember, no middle class, empirical government. So you had this empire, you had a Caesar, you had all this that was very high on oppressing those without. So not only was there a huge gap between those who have and those who haven't, if you didn't have, they stole your land. They took advantage of you. They forced you out of property. They raised your taxes to the point to where like all of your belongings would get turned over to the government. So we see that, man, the gospel of Jesus brought in a whole new revolutionary way of how we interact with human beings and society. That God says, I actually value every human being that's created in the image of God. Are we tracking so far? In fact, I want us to see that in Scripture, there is never anywhere in Scripture that says that every single human being should be on the same economic status. In fact, when you are looking at the Edenic mandate to work, that you'll see that, man, we are supposed to rule earth as God rules the heavens, take care of the earth. So it's understanding that not every human being has the same level of leadership gifts and resources. But what we are supposed to do is that if God has given you the gift to lead and has given you the resources to take care of others, we actually have a role that we play in society of helping human beings flourish. But what happens? Sin has caused us to actually take that gift and use it to build ourselves up and push other people down. Is this making sense? You actually see it right after Cain and Abel. Go read that. If you never read the story of Cain and Abel, Cain kills his brother Abel. He starts in the Bible, what we read is the first city. But you know why that city was built? To build himself up and protect him and his. That is our sinful nature. That's what we want to do. Build our own empire, take care of ourselves. Some of us will live long enough to become our own pharaohs. And so we see this difference. So what Christ comes along, changes how we see human beings. It has nothing to do with economic status, but it has everything of how we view other human beings as made in the image of God. Are we tracking so far? Here's what we see, though, in today's society with poverty. Not all I want to receive with grace, right? The problem we face in America, we see the fentanyl and drug crisis. you realize that not every person who is homeless, if you give them a home, it will not take care of all their problems in 2 weeks. In fact, we've had homeless ministry in our own community that we've done, and the majority of them will tell you, I choose to live this way. There are people in San Francisco who are making 6 digits, and they say if they have one hit of fentanyl, they will leave their job and their family to go live on the streets. That's how highly addictive it is. I just read an article the other day on the East Coast. There's a new fentanyl on the market, if you can imagine this, where it is laced with all kinds. I mean, people are dying like almost immediately, and Narcan's not even bringing them back. It's a huge crisis. The drug crisis we have in this country, pharmaceuticals, all of this thing are driving people to not working and driving people to homelessness and poverty. We have a poverty mindset issue in America, and it's generational. I grew up in this. I want you to know that my wife and I, even when I left the youth pastorate and began to prepare to plant this church, we spent a year and a half being trained and getting ready. I worked 2 part-time jobs because I had to travel on the weekends to try to get churches to help support us. So I would preach at other churches, travel. I'd come back. I would substitute teach a day, and most evenings I worked at what's called a video rental store. So go ask your dad or your grandparents if you don't know what that is. They used to exist. And I didn't make a lot of money. My wife, luckily, she had good insurance because she worked for the middle school. And but we didn't make a lot of money. I think I was bringing home like $400 or $500 a month. So there was a season we lived off of food stamps and WIC to help take care of our kids. But we knew the moment that we were able to get off of it, we were able to say, hey, I don't want to take somebody else's stuff and when we can provide for ourselves. So we knew, hey, it's time. I think there are times when those programs are very needed and very helpful. Are y'all receiving with grace today, right? So I want you to know that if you're in the congregation today and these are things that you've had to do, but this is not a demonization of those things. I just want you to see where we're at. We also, now, and I want you to know what the poverty mindset is. It's a scarcity mindset. It says that, man, I don't have anything and there's no chance for me to ever have anything. And here's what you actually do. You will hoard your goods and spend all your money. People with poverty mindset do not know how to be generous. Because people will say things like this, if I had money, I would give it. That's not true. Because if you have a poverty mindset, you will always spend your money and hoard all your goods. You will make sure you have what you want, but you're actually destroying your future. Poverty mindset are people who can't celebrate other people's success. You know why? Because in your mind, you think success, there's not enough success for everybody to go around. And so if somebody else is flourishing or somebody else has stuff, you actually are jealous of them and hate them because they have more than you. I follow a guy named Cameron Haynes. I don't know if you've ever heard of Cameron Haynes, but he said there's a slogan that people will always use that they tell him. This is a guy, he works full-time, shoots 100 arrows a day, runs a half marathon almost every day, and lifts weights, and has a family. And do you sleep? I don't know. But he said people will say things like this, and he's very successful, all this stuff, and they say, well, must be nice. Anybody ever said that or heard that? Must be nice. And it's like, yeah, but you don't know what he's done to get where he's at. And so the poverty mindset actually can't celebrate other people's success because it's taking away from your opportunity for success. And then we have the consumer mindset. The consumer mindset tied into capitalism, and I'm not trying to demonize everything about capitalism, but can I tell you capitalism, the heart of capitalism is just keep going after more. And what that's crept over into this generation is saying we spend more than we make. And it's driving people to poverty. It's driving to more of our kids still, and again, receive with grace, but they're still in their 30s, not providing for themselves because they can't afford to live on their own because they would rather have the mindset of, I want all my stuff without actually having to work for it. This is a part of the tension and the problem that we live in. And so if this is at the core of what we are dealing with, how many of you know that taking care of the poor is 2 different things in those different contexts? Because it's not the church's responsibility to take care of somebody who actually has the ability to work and do things, and they're creating poverty for themselves. Is this making sense? It's not saying there aren't. I'm not going to keep reiterating that. You just have to receive it with grace. All right. So what does all this have to do with a sermon on work, Pastor Brandon? Because I believe this, one of the greatest remedies to poverty is for believers to take their responsibility to work seriously. Wise people are working people. So don't miss this. Many of us think that work is a part of the curse, and it's not. Work was given to us before the curse. What the curse did was make work. He says you'll actually work, and now it'll be by the sweat of your brow. It'll be difficult to make the ground produce. It'll be difficult to, we've all been in seasons of our life where like, man, you're faithful when you're working, but it feels hard. But the work itself is not the curse. In fact, we were given that mandate from the moment we were created. Work the earth, cultivate the earth, rule the fish and the birds of the air as Yahweh rules and leads the heavens. Are y'all following so far? And so I want us to be reminded of this because I think we live in extremes in our culture. We have an extreme of like we're either workaholics or really lazy. Most of us don't really concentrate on the middle ground of like who are just faithful and diligent. Because I want to remind you, because I used to be a workaholic. I believe I have a strong work ethic. But I used to be a workaholic. And what that means is it doesn't mean that I overworked. It means that I saw my work as the only validation of who I was. And when you do that, when you live as a workaholic, because I want you to know God never has anything good to say about lazy people in the Bible, but he also has nothing good to say about people who refuse to rest. Because leisure and laziness are not the same thing. God does command for us to rest. But most of us, you hear people say things like, man, I'm a self-made man. I did this. I pulled myself up by my bootstraps. I'm sorry, but what did Jesus say in Matthew 6? He says, look at the birds of the air. They toil. They go about. He said, do they worry about what they wear? Do they worry about what they eat? No. You know why? Because as they make their nest and they do their job every single day, God causes worms to come up from the ground. He causes the grass to grow. Everything we have is a gift from God, not because somehow you produced it. And when you work with that mentality, you actually work from a place of, I'm doing this to glorify God. God, you provide what we need. It's a different mentality of how we approach our work. And so here we are. Don't forget, chapters 1 through 9 of Proverbs, we've been talking about this, is a father talking to his sons. And you get to chapter 6, and it's like the gloves come off. Because the first few chapters, he's like, listen, son, just listen to me. Stay away. And like, if you ever been a father or a parent of teenagers, you get chapter 6. Notice how he keeps calling them lazy bones, right? And here we get to this moment, and know this, that this word, sluggard, shows up 17 times in the book of Proverbs alone. And it's translated lazy, slug, couch potato, an actual hater of work. Because what we do is we tend to fall in love with the idea of not working. That's why people can't wait to get to retirement. But even our idea of retirement is not biblically centered. Because most of us think retirement is freedom from work, but retirement should be freedom from obligation. Could you imagine? I want to really encourage you students just for a moment. Because you're not going to see the value in this, and I can't stress this to you enough. Do you realize that right now at 16, 17, when the moment you're able to start drawing a paycheck or working and getting your own money, if you would just invest, not save, invest like $5 a month, and you didn't touch it for 30 years, you know you would become a millionaire? If you just said, listen, I'm going to take whatever I get, and I'm going to actually see that and guess what you could do as a millionaire in your 40s? You wouldn't have to say, man, I'm obligated to a 9-to-5 punch the clock. But I can actually have the freedom to say yes to more of what God's called me to do. I could use my resources and the things that I've been a good steward of to actually give back to the kingdom, to provide for those who really need it, to actually pour into and invest in others. But some of you will think, man, but I need that $5 for a mocha matcha latte, hot whatever. But that's a poverty mindset. Poverty mindset says, I need the coffee now. But a biblical mindset says, but I'm investing in my future. You're actually trading what you want now for what's best for later. Come on, somebody. I'm preaching way better than y'all are letting on. So listen, we get to this idea. Remember, I just want to remind us as we move forward what Proverbs really are. Remember, Proverbs are principles, not a promise. And Proverbs are a set of principles designed to develop a set of practical skills for living well in God's world. Here's a dad trying to encourage his son in Proverbs 6 of how to approach his work, how to see his opportunity for work. And what is the star of this parable? An ant. And I learned more about ants than I care to ever know, probably more than I'll ever even share as I prepared for this message. But I want to give you a few stats about ants. 12,000 different species. In fact, ants are known by pest control people as the #1 nuisance in America. If you've ever had ants, you know they're really hard and difficult to get rid of. And there are 1 quadrillion ants on Earth. That's 1 million ants per one human being. Everybody's worried about AI. Y'all need to be worried about AENT. Come on, somebody. Dad jokes galore. Come on. I came loaded today. Do you realize that ants are on every continent, don't miss this, except for Antarctica? That's when you know God has a sense of humor. Come on, somebody. Ants are even in space. They have a space station in space, and they took a colony of ants. There's ants living in space, guys. It's incredible, right? They actually build roads and barricades and nests. Do you realize that ants will cross rivers? They will form a ball and roll across rivers, and ants will walk and cross over. Like somebody's like, they're on the bottom of this thing so that other ants can cross. Isn't that incredible? And so let's learn 3 lessons from the ant that will help us to put in context today. Proverbs 6, verse 7. Look what he says. It says, though they have no prince or governor or ruler to make them work. I want to stop right there. No one makes them work. It's in their intrinsic DNA. And the first thing we see with ants is they produce. Remember, they don't have a government. You say, well, they have a queen. Yeah, but she's like the Queen of England. She don't really do anything. All she does, you realize, sorry. Hashtag America. Come on, somebody. Hey, we just celebrated July 4th, right? Listen. Y'all pay attention. Listen. The queen's main responsibility is to lay eggs. Do you realize the females protect the nest? You know what male ants do? They just mate with the queen. I'm not going to say anything else about that. That's all the males do. But every ant in the colony is a volunteer. No one makes them work. I want to show you a really inspirational person. See if you might know who this is. Anybody know who this is? Kobe Bryant. I got to be the first to admit, I did not like Kobe when he played. And simply because I grew up watching Michael Jordan, I felt like he was trying to be Michael Jordan. I was like, man, I was a Kobe hater. Did not like Kobe. Obviously, sadly, him and his daughter passed away. And as you begin to learn more about somebody's story, you begin to respect them. And I've grown to really love and respect Kobe for a lot of things that he did and what he represented. But they did an interview with Kobe one time, and the reporter asked him, said, how do you handle all of the external expectations placed on you? And you know what Kobe said? He looked at the reporter like he was crazy, like he had 3 heads. And he said, external expectations? He said, I just want you to know, no one has higher expectations of me than me. He said, so I don't give a rip what anybody else expects of me, because whatever they expect of me, I expect more. He doesn't have to be externally driven. This guy's work ethic, they actually labeled it. He created a book, and he created this whole thing called the Mamba mentality. Anybody ever heard of the Mamba mentality? And it's this idea of fearlessness and perseverance and setting goals and working hard to get to those goals. And the crazy thing is like you can talk about his 5 championships, but there were teams he played on that weren't very good. But you never saw Kobe take a day off. In fact, this picture is a pretty famous picture. Because in this game right here, an aging Kobe gets fouled on a play, and as he comes down, he actually tears his Achilles tendon. Now, I watched the playoffs this year, and there was a player for the Indiana Pacers, Tyrese Halliburton, who tore his Achilles. I would have been like Halliburton. He laid on the ground screaming and pounding the floor, and they carried this man off on a cart. My man Kobe tears his Achilles, gets up, walks to the free throw line, calmly sinks 2 free throws, and then walks off. And the point is this, is that the scripture tells us that ants don't have to be externally motivated. I want to tell you today that most of us, we're always looking for some kind of external motivation to do the things necessary in our lives. And I want you to know that if you always have to be motivated by somebody else, you will always live in frustration, and you'll never achieve the things that God has for you in your life because you're always needing somebody else to pump you up. Ants are internally driven to produce. The colony is made up of all volunteers. Check this out. It's actually a picture of the Edenic mandate that God's given us, that everybody plays a role in helping humans flourish. That's how God intended for us to live. Look at verse 8. He says, they labor hard all summer, gathering food for the winter. The second thing we see is that ants provide. Ants provide. Remember, they provide not just for themselves, but for other people. In fact, like if you've ever left anything out, sweet or something like that, you won't see just one ant. That one ant will come, see it, and go back and get 50 more, come back and to haul their find off. They understand the importance of providing. Here's what's amazing. They have a mutualistic relationship with what's called an aphid. If you're a farmer, you know what an aphid is. It's a small insect that feeds off of fruits and produce. And what they will do is they will actually protect the aphid from predators, and the aphid will secrete a sweet substance that the ants feed off of. They understand the mutualistic relationship. I think about my father-in-law who would tell stories. His dad, my wife's grandfather, grew up as a child during the Great Depression. And they would tell stories of here is a family that's just lived. I mean, when you walked into her grandfather's basement, they would have hundreds of Mrs. Buttersworth syrup bottles, because when you grew up in the Depression, you never threw anything away. If you got a canister, a can, or a bottle, you saw them everywhere. If you've ever been to anybody that lived in that generation's house, you're probably going to find some old relics stored up. And it's not because they had some sort of that's going to be valuable one day. It was because you reused that for something. And he would tell stories of man, they're busting their tail trying to farm and provide. But if they had a neighbor a mile or so down the road, and man, their tractor broke down or something happened, you gathered the family and you went to help that family out. That's what believers do. They understand that I'm not just trying to protect me and mine, but man, I'm looking out to how I can serve and love my neighbor, how I can help others in their time of need. Are y'all following so far? And the third thing we see is they prepare. Notice what he says. He says they store up for winter. Do you know what other insects like grasshoppers do during the winter? They die. They die. They're one of the few insects that understand stewardship and creating margin. An insect is wise enough to create margin more than human beings sometimes. Do you realize that the story of Joseph, that we see that, man, the greatest blessing that came from Joseph wasn't the fact that he was a dreamer. It was the fact that he was a great businessman. It's the fact that he understood the value of stewardship and margin. And because he did that, he saved thousands of people. Isn't that incredible? And so let's see the contrast between the ant and the lazy person. Look at verse 10. He says, a little extra sleep, a little more slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest. What we see is the lazy are unmotivated. Now remember, laziness is not the same as leisure. We need times of rest. We need to enjoy the times we get to spend with our hobbies or having fun. Again, receive this with grace today, because I want you to know that God takes pleasure in our rest too. But he's saying lazy people are impossible to motivate because they're already looking for their next time. When I grew up in the 80s, and there was a famous song that said something like this: I'm working for the weekend. And most of us, if we're honest, we have that mentality. Monday comes around, we're depressed, and we're just kind of woe is me, and then Friday is what we live for. I just want you to know there's nothing necessarily inherently wrong with that, but I just want you to know it's not the biblical approach to work. Are y'all following me? Lazy or unmotivated. Do you realize that there's actually an ant that does personify a sluggard? And it's called the shining slave maker ant. This is fascinating. The shining slave maker ant will go and steal a pupa or an unborn ant from another colony and bring it back to its colony. And when that pupa hatches, that ant thinks it's in its own colony. He thinks it's with his people. And so it immediately does what ants are wired to do. It gets to work. And what will happen is these slave maker ants will gather up all these pupas and they start depending on those ants to provide their every need. So much so that these ants are actually adapt to that they're great fighting ants, but they get to the point where they can't even feed themselves. Scientists did an experiment where they put these ants in a thing by themselves and they put food in there with them, and the ants still starved to death because they had created a life where they were dependent on somebody else for their survival. That's how he correlates a lazy person. It's someone who always is the victim, and they always have a reason why they deserve what other people have. They deserve to have other people take care of their needs. It's getting really quiet, so I'm going to move on. Look at Proverbs 13:4. Lazy people want much but get little, but those who work hard will prosper. What we see with a lazy person is the lazy are unproductive. Can I tell you, when your want outweighs your work, you end up in poverty? Because what we see in our culture is we have a lot of people with a consumer mindset, but a couch potato work ethic. Because we've inadvertently told our kids that, man, you need to go after, as soon as you get out of high school. I mean, we have the attitude today. I found this interesting, that I have a buddy in Bowling Green. Many of you have met Pastor Brennan, and they're a church plant. They're trying to get off the ground. You know, they've been going for not even a year yet, and he's trying to hire a worship leader, and they're set up and tear down in a little expo center in Bowling Green. And he said, man, I sent all of these requests to interview these college students coming out of ministry school. And he said, I can't get one person to call me for an interview. And the reason why is because he can't pay them a full-time salary. He can't pay them this big astronomical amount because most people will graduate college thinking that you're going to automatically make 6 digits, or that you're going to not have to work your way up from the bottom just because you somehow skated through school for 4 years. There's nothing that we are intrinsically teaching this generation to say, listen, you have to work to get moved up and to get promoted. And so what we see is that they're unproductive. Look at verse 11 in chapter 6. He says, then poverty will pounce on you like a bandit. Scarcity will attack you like an armed robber. What we see is the lazy or unprepared. Have you thought about what this imagery gives us? I don't know if anybody in here has ever been held up or robbed, but that's not something you expect to happen. You're not going all day going man, we're 6 o'clock, we'll get here, I'm getting robbed. You know what that communicates? An element of surprise. Have you ever seen somebody who was surprised about an outcome of their life, but you saw it a mile away? That's what he's communicating. The lazy are always surprised that their life is jacked up or messed up or blaming somebody else. But he's saying the wise can see it coming from a mile away. I was sharing a scripture with my daughter the other day in Proverbs 1 when it says a bird is wise enough to when he sees somebody making a trap for it, it will go the other way. But the fool will watch a trap being made for themselves and jump right in it. I just want you to know, when you are not wise with your work, when you don't take it serious at 16, 17, 18, you'll be 40 and you'll be in a job that you're miserable at, you'll hate because you never understood why God gave you the gift to work in the first place. Look at Proverbs 26, 13 through 16. It says the lazy person claims, there's a lion on the road. I mean, we don't see that today, right? You're not like, oh, there's a lion outside, I can't get up. Yes, I'm sure there's a lion out there. Look at verse 14. As a door swings back and forth on its hinges, so the lazy person turns over in bed. Lazy people take food in their hand, but don't even lift it to their mouth. Lazy people consider themselves smarter than 7 wise counselors. Now let's take a second to understand this. The next thing about the lazy people is they don't face reality. Now here's the thing. In their culture, maybe you read verse 13, you're like, that's weird, but that was a reality for them. There were lions out there. You did have to worry about predators. So the thing is like, yes, that's a reality, but you still got to go to work. The point we're trying to learn here today is like, life is hard. Work is hard. People are hard to work with. People are hard to work for. Family is hard. Situations are hard. Loss is hard. All these things. But guess what? You still have to face reality. Somehow many of us have grown up in a church environment that has told us that, man, if it's painful, it's not of God. And what I want to remind us is that you are going to go through seasons of pain, hardship, when it is difficult to get up and go to work. But guess what? The wise face reality. They don't try to make excuses as to why to avoid it. And so most of us now will look to escape reality. We escape reality through alcohol, through drugs, through pharmaceuticals, through all these other things because reality is just too hard for us. I'm here to tell you, guys, life is hard. But when you face it head on and understand that, man, I'm expecting this to be difficult, that's when you begin to live with wisdom. The second thing we see is the lazy never finish what they start. What does he say? He says the lazy person puts his hand in the bowl but doesn't even lift it to his mouth. That's symbolism of somebody who doesn't finish what they start. You guys have an opportunity in this generation to change the game when it comes to understanding, do I want to be a person who commit? When I say yes to something, I will live it out. I will complete the task. Because we live in a non-committed generation. Do you realize that right now, your generation, Generation Alpha, they will change jobs 32 times in a lifetime? Rare are the days when you'll walk into a business and see somebody who's been working there for 30 plus years. Because most of us are uncommitted. We see it a lot in the church world. I just got to say, like, I actually appreciate those in the church who sometimes don't get connected, because I would rather you not get connected because you know you're not going to be faithful, except for those who say I'm all in but are unfaithful. We see it all the time. Like, and Christians should be the ones who set the precedent. But we live in an uncommitted, unfaithful culture. We quit jobs quickly and we show up late everywhere we go. Some people take advantage of whatever time they have at their job. I used to work for a firm. I've worked just about every job you can think of growing up. I remember I got paid by, I feel like that, I remember my day. There was 3 of us sitting around yesterday. I said, all we need is a pipe and a cup of black coffee. Because it was like the get off my lawn moment, And we're just like, man, I remember at 14, a restaurant paid me cash under the table to come and break down boxes. And like most of us are like, well, I don't want to work for a restaurant. We don't want you either with that attitude. I don't know what you're going to do to my food. But what if you were like, every little job I take, I'm going to be the most, I don't care if I'm 15 or 16, I'm going to be more faithful than the 30-year-old that's working at that job. What would it do to our culture? What would it do to our community? Come on, somebody. Most people get so mad. Listen, I get frustrated at the Christians who get frustrated at some of our local restaurants who always are blasting the restaurants for not getting their orders right or for being sloppy or for whatever. And I'm like, you had a hand in raising them. Because we've taught them this isn't a real job because it's not your full-time job because you're not an adult yet. And so what do? You treat your job like you treat school. You show up barely awake and you show up with no passion or desire to be faithful in what you've been asked to do. I got to go. Listen. The lazy don't finish what they start. There was a story of a business owner who ran his own company, and he said he used to promote job opportunities on Christian radio. After about 6 months or whatever, a friend of his told him, he said, "Hey, I don't hear your commercial on the radio anymore." He said, "Are you not promoting? Are you not hiring?" He said, "No, I'm always hiring." He said, "But I had to stop promoting on Christian radio." He said, "Because Christians were the worst employees." He said, "I would rather hire a pagan with a good work ethic than a Christian." He said, "Because most of them would show up and they knew I was a Christian, and so they expected me to take it easy on them all the time." They expected. And listen, we have people who, in our church, we'll talk about this in a few moments, there should never be anybody who is without a job, because we have so many people. There's been so many people who have found jobs in this church because we have so many people with resources and opportunity to get people hired somewhere. The problem becomes when you become an unfaithful employee, and then you're going to get to the point where people will not hire somebody from within the church because you've always shown up late or you've always taken advantage of your Christian employer. We must finish what we start. If an ant can do all of this, let me just ask this question: how much more is expected from me? You see, it is a very unfulfilling life to be driven by the love of ease and comfort. How many of you know our work has more value to it than than the ants to God? So how should we respond as believers? Again, I'm talking to believers in the room. I mean, my prayer is that we would have persistence, passion, purpose, and that we would work from a place of having principles. Have you ever considered, like, what principles do I work? Like, when I approach my work, what principle do I approach work from? What values or characteristics do I want to have to whatever I put my hand to? You ever thought about that? Because most of us have, maybe you grew up with just this mindset of just like, man, I got to make money. I got to make money. Work is more than just about making money. It's producing something that brings glory to God with everything that we do. You realize that ants can lift 50 to 100 times their own weight? They're so fast, too, that if you put their speed in context to human speed, it would be like us running 35 miles an hour. And here's the cool thing. God does not expect us to be superheroes. He just says, I want you to be diligent. I want you to be faithful. We should work with enthusiasm, serve with enthusiasm and passion. And I get it. Maybe you're here and you're like, but you don't know my boss. You don't know about where I work. You don't know what I got to put up with. And here's the thing. Maybe you couldn't do it for them, but you could do it if you were doing it for the Lord. You know what 1 Corinthians 10:31 says? It says, whatever you eat, drink, or whatever you do it all for the glory of God. Colossians 3:17, what does it say? And whatever you do or say, do it as a representative of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks through him to God the Father. You see, when Jesus gets into a situation, everything changes. And if you are a follower of Jesus, Jesus is your boss. Not Bill, not Bob, not Helen, not whoever. Jesus is your boss. You might answer to Bob, but you work for the Lord. Come on, somebody. I love the story of my friend Amy Wimberly. She, man, if you don't know Amy, she is just full of energy and life, and she's a true servant. She really is. And she's working several jobs, and she started a job with DoorDash, and she was telling me all these stories about doing DoorDash. But here's what she started doing. Because some people would see that, somebody would see that as like, oh, well, that's not a real job. That's just to make extra income. But she saw it as an opportunity. She said, I'll see their order, and I'll think about things that maybe they didn't think about asking for. And so I'll put extra napkins in there, or I'll put ketchup in there, or I'll do stuff. And she said, and then I pray over every single bag I deliver. And if I get an opportunity, I get to share Jesus with them. And she was talking to another couple who was also doing DoorDash, and they were like, man, we're going to start doing the same thing. And I thought, that's what it means to have Jesus as your boss. That's what it means. Can I tell you that once you bring Jesus into a situation, it changes. My pay should be a reflection of my principles, not the other way around. The problem is there are many people who only have the character that money can buy. You know what that means? That means if they would, then I would. But that's not the way of Jesus. The way of Jesus says, I'm going to be a man or a woman of character regardless of how they respond or how they act or how they treat me. Is it easy? No. That's why we need the Holy Spirit. That's why we need Jesus. It's not the way of the kingdom. You know what my heart is? That if we have kids or students that grow up in this church and they're discipled by our kids and student ministry and they're discipled by the adults in this church and they grow into being a contributor to the kingdom and contributor to this church, my prayer is that anybody who's looking to hire anybody would say, if they go to Generation Church, I want to hire that person. Because, man, they're just different. They got 12-year-olds that will look a grown man in the eye and shake their hands and talk to them, not be afraid of adult conversation, because they haven't been stuck into a device their entire life. You realize we have young men that are 20-something that can't even look at another man in the eye and shake their hands. Like this, that should be the heart of our church. Because guess what? That's going to give them opportunities to be the hands and feet of Jesus in their workplace. I'm going to share one more story and then I'm done. True story of a woman named Brenda. She had trained to go rock climbing out west. She was going up this road. She finally made her trip, and she was climbing. She's a little over halfway up, and she actually loses a contact. And, of course, she's freaking out. She's like, man, I can't see. Like, man, this is ruining my trip. And she actually prayed while she's finishing climbing up the road. She's like, God, please help me find my contact. I mean, you think there's climbers down below. There's other people coming behind her, and here you are on this side of this cliff. She gets to the top. She's trying to figure out what she's going to do. And a few minutes later, another climber comes up and he says, hey, did anybody lose a contact? And she's like, you got to be kidding me. So she goes over there. She gets the contact, puts it. She's like, sure enough, it's her contact. And she says, how in the world did you find this contact? And he said, well, I was climbing. He said, and I just randomly looked in front of me and I saw an ant carrying a contact. He said, I thought, that's weird. Here's the point. We never know when our work may produce the answer to someone else's prayer. You know what that ant was doing? What it does. Could you imagine? Guys, I found a spaceship. Because they were faithful in their work, they were an answer to somebody else's prayer. Would you stand with me, church? Here's what I want you to know. Jesus was faithful in his work. He humbly worked for 30 years in his Father's business, but he spent his entire life tending to the Father's business. And you know what that business was? You and me. The cross. In fact, he worked all the way up until the moment where he said, it is finished. The work was finished. The job's not done. And so what's cool is we get to rest from our efforts to earn salvation, but we get to also have the joy of using our hands, if we are able, our hands, our feet, our lips, to serve the Lord in every aspect of our work.